warroomsports.com. Get that mobile app.
What's up, sports fans? This is Fred Perdue again from HeavyInTheGames.com in conjunction with warroomsports.com. This is the War Room, and we have Scott Wright from DraftCountdown.com to help us talk a little NFL draft and break down the combine from this past week, as well as the wide receiver position. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing excellent. Good to talk to you as always.
Great. And you are one of the top draftniks out there, one of those people that really knows every prospect inside and out. Let the fans know a little bit about yourself as well as your website.
Yeah, well, the website's draftcountdown.com, and I guess the thing best known for is the in-depth mock drafts, which are also relatively accurate over the years, about as accurate as you can be in this business, I guess. But I just started out as a fan, average draftnik. I started a website just as a hobby, and it kind of grew from there. And after I graduated from college, it had gotten to the point where it was popular enough, I decided to do it full-time and been running DraftCountdown.com ever since. So, I'm a fan first and foremost, but lots of good stuff on the site. You mentioned the rankings. I have a record number of players in the rankings this year. They all have the measurables, the career statistics, headshots for all of them. So lots of good stuff to check out on the site. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter also at DraftCountdown.
Well, Scott, I've always been a big fan, and it's great to have you on. So let's jump right into this. The NFL Scouting Combine has come and gone. Let's kind of do a little bit of a breeze over this. So a lot of great prospects. Of course, you have the Jadeveon Clowney's, you have the Michael Sams. Of course, we have those stories. Those are great and all. But who are some of the people that really caught your eye that aren't the bigger names?
Well, honestly, and it is a kind of a bigger name, but to me, one of the biggest stories that came out of this year's Combine was Alabama offensive tackle Cyrus Kouandjio, because he went in as a player that, even though his stock had dropped a little bit this past season, still was considered a likely first-rounder. Did not look very good at the scouting combine. He looked out of shape and sluggish, and then there were reports that a lot of teams failed him on his physical due to potentially arthritic knee. So that's a huge concern with Cyrus Kouandjio and just Alabama prospects in general. I think we've seen this a number of times. Just last year, Dee Milner had to have shoulder surgery. Jesse Williams had to have surgery. We saw Eddie Lacy drop. Those Bama prospects come out really banged up, and it looks like that might be the case with Kouandjio too. And we just don't know how this is going to affect his stock. And I think all teams are going to kind of look at the situation differently. Some teams have conservative doctors. Some teams have liberal doctors. I don't think there is going to be a consensus. And could he still go in the first round? Possibly, but his stock is very much in flux now, and I think he's probably the guy that, of all the big names going in, I think he's the one whose stock may have been affected the most, positively or negatively.
And Cyrus Kouandjio, a guy I really liked out of high school, out of Maryland, and he ended up going to Alabama and really being that stud left tackle that everyone thought he would be. But those Alabama players, they just tend to either peak at the wrong time. And it's kind of almost like a Charlie Weiss effect. I know you're a Notre Dame guy as well, so you can attest to this. But Alabama players, they tend to peak by the time they get a chance to get out of college, and once they go on to the NFL, a la Mark Ingram, Trent Richardson, and the list can go on and on. Those guys tend to peak, and then they either that or they're injured by the time they get there because of that physical style of play.
Well, that's just it. It's just such a competitive environment down there, and the former players have said that they're afraid to sit down or take some time off to heal because there's another 5-star recruit right behind them waiting to take their job. So that's why I think you see some of these guys maybe neglect their health to a certain degree while they're in college, and then once they get to this pre-draft process and start going through these medical exams, we start finding problems, and we'll see what it does with Kouandjio. And like I said, there's still a chance maybe he goes in the first round, and I like him too. I'm not as down on him as a lot of people are. I think there's a lot to like about him, but it's just very much up in the air, especially with the precedent of guys coming from that program having injuries and sliding a little bit.
Now, a guy that really caught my eye, and most fans won't really know this name yet, but John Brown out of Pittsburgh State, wide receiver I really liked, really explosive. One thing I really like is this: when you see a guy that, he's a speed guy, but is he able to have good hands? Is he a hands catcher or a body catcher? He's not a body catcher, and he has a place in this league, whether it's on special teams, whether it's in the slot. or maybe a possible number 2 receiver if he develops correctly. But he's one of those guys I really liked as well.
Yeah, and a good small school prospect, very productive. Over 4,000 career receiving yards, 41 touchdowns in college. Not real big. That's the concern with him. He measured in at 5'10", 179 pounds. But I always say, if you're going to be small, you better be fast. And John Brown is very fast. He ran a 4.34, had a really nice performance at the All-Star game, showed that he could hang with the big boys. And I think his value is going to come as a backup wide receiver, whether it be a number 3, number 4, number 5. But I think his real value is going to come on special teams as a return man. And if I were going to make a return specialist rankings on the site, he'd probably be in the top 2 or 3. So John Brown, yes, he can contribute as a receiver, and that's that big play threat, and will be a big play threat because of that speed vertically. But I think special teams, if he gets drafted, that's going to be why.
One of the things that really didn't catch my eye, because I kind of expected it to happen, was Dre Archer running the 4.26 40 that he did. He's a speed guy. He actually reminds me a lot of a younger Chris Rainey before he actually got to the NFL. He's a lot smaller guy, very shifty, very fast, straight line speed more than shifty speed. But one thing I did like about him on film is he can really make plays in space, and if he has to, every now and then he can truck a guy.
Yeah, and Dre Archer didn't have the big senior campaign that we were expecting. He was dinged up a little bit, and certainly durability is going to be an issue with a guy his size. He came in at 5'7 3/4", only 173 pounds, and you mentioned very fast. He ran extremely well. But once again, unexpected. I mean, I had him estimated as a 4.4 flat type. He outperformed that, ran a 4.26, and I think absolutely helped his stock. And I think he'll probably come off the board somewhere in the middle rounds, round 4 or 5. And it's just, where do you play him? I think that's the big concern. He's going to be a jack of all trades, where you can line him up in the backfield on kind of third downs as kind of a change of pace situational type. You can line him up as a receiver in the slot. You can get him some touches on special teams as a return man. So I'd kind of compare his value to that of a guy like Ace Sanders last year, who went, I believe, in the 4th or 5th round and wound up being a pretty good value for the Jaguars. He wound up contributing as a rookie, and I think you can make an argument that the Jaguars got almost as much of a contribution out of Sanders in the middle rounds as the Rams got out of Tavon Austin in the top 10 overall. And I said that leading up to the draft last year. I had nothing against Tavon Austin. It's just, when you're talking about how to allocate this finite amount of resources, I'm not using a top 10 overall pick on a slot receiver and return guy, because you can get a Sanders in the middle rounds. You can get a guy like Dre Archer in this class in the middle rounds, probably. DeAnthony Thomas from Oregon. So Jerick McKinnon from Georgia Southern, another guy that might be in that category. So there's a lot of options. I want to use my premium draft picks on premium positions. I want to address the offensive and defensive lines, quarterbacks, etc. So I didn't agree with what the Rams did there, but I think we saw what the Jaguars did. You get a weapon like that in those middle rounds, and you're going to have to get creative to find a way to maximize his value. But I think we saw with guys like Sanders that and it's probably going to help someone like Archer, Thomas, etc.
Now, granted, I do like DeAnthony Thomas as a player, but I would think as well that taking a guy like Dre Archer later is probably a better value than taking a guy like DeAnthony Thomas when they're very similar players. DeAnthony Thomas is a little bit bigger, maybe a little more banged up, and I saw a few things in his game where he really didn't succeed as much when he was called on to be the guy at Oregon versus being a complementary player to a guy like Kenyon Barner or the Michael James.
And let's face it, the NFL is a big man's game. There's a reason we don't see too many of these 170-pound type guys, because in the long run, they probably aren't going to hold up physically. So, yeah, I mean, and honestly, even in the 4th, 5th round, I'd almost be reluctant to use a 4th or 5th rounder on Thomas or Archer. If you could tell me I'd get Jerick McKinnon a round or two later, that's fine. I'd rather take advantage of that value. So that's kind of the questions teams have to ask themselves when they start considering a DeAnthony Thomas in maybe the 3rd round and say, okay, we like DeAnthony Thomas, but do we like him 2 rounds more than Dre Archer? Do we like him 2 or 3 rounds more than Jerick McKinnon? And I'm not so sure I do. So once again, it's just about how you're going to allocate your resources, and those guys are going to contribute at the next level, and if they make one play a game, that could make a worthwhile investment because they're a threat to score every time they touch the ball from anywhere on the field in a number of different facets of the game. So it's kind of interesting. I think we're going to see more and more of these guys going forward because guys like Thomas and Archer are being featured in college offenses more. So I think that's going to trickle upwards.
Now, the quarterback position, and we all know the quarterback is the sexy position. A lot of these guys did not perform at the scouting combine. They decided to go on and wait to their pro day and other personal days to do this, whether it was Johnny Manziel, whether it was Teddy Bridgewater. At one point, it almost was A.J. McCarron. What are your thoughts on how these quarterbacks are handling this situation with the combine?
I think it's much ado about nothing for the most part. And we see this year after year, and it's always a big story at the time, but ultimately it rarely, if ever, affects these guys' draft stocks because inevitably they go to their pro day and perform outstanding, and then everyone forgets that they didn't throw an Indy. I've yet to hear of a top quarterback prospect having a bad pro day. They all get rave reviews, as they should, because they've had months to prepare for it based on a script, making the exact same throws to the exact same receivers in a controlled environment. So, Bridgewater and Manziel, they're going to get rave reviews for their pro day performances. But I think in the short term, even though those guys didn't hurt their stock by not throwing, I think Blake Bortles from Central Florida helped it a little, showing that competitiveness. And it wasn't a perfect performance, but it was pretty good. And maybe that's enough to give him the slight edge right now. But just personally, in a guy like Teddy Bridgewater from Louisville, I was a little disappointed that he didn't go out there and make his case because he talked all weekend long in Indy about how he's competitive, and Manziel did too, how competitive they are, how they want to compete. Well, show me, don't tell me. They had a chance to go out there and go head-to-head with and make their case for why they should be a team's franchise quarterback and maybe the number one overall pick, and only Bortles stepped up to the plate. So, I was personally disappointed, especially in Bridgewater, knowing the type of kid he is, but ultimately them not throwing isn't going to have a huge effect on their stock. I think it's more talking about how Bortles and McCarron helped themselves than Bridgewater and Manziel hurt themselves.
And last but not least, we have Khalil Mack, a guy that really isn't getting a lot of the attention right now. You get Jadeveon Clowney, you have guys like Anthony Barr, Justin Gilbert in the secondary, HaHa Clinton Dix in the secondary, C.J. Mosley, other guys like that are getting the pub. But Khalil Mack out of Buffalo has really, really made his case for being a top 5 pick at this point.
Yeah, there's a strong argument, and I think people that follow the draft really closely have had Khalil Mack rated very highly for a long time. It's just the national media that's starting to realize who Khalil Mack is. I mean, I had him on the front page of my site basically all fall, highlighting him as a player to keep an eye on. And I love Khalil Mack from Buffalo. I think he's absolutely one of the top 10 players in this draft. But I still give a slight edge to Anthony Barr from UCLA, and I know there's some sentiment starting to go in Mack's direction. And I don't want to take anything away from him. Like I say, I like him a lot. I just give Barr the slight edge simply because of the potential. And once again, we're not necessarily evaluating these players for what they are right now. We got to look where they're going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And Anthony Barr, he's only been playing linebacker for 2 years. He used to play on the other side of the ball. So he's still very raw. He's already a very good player to the point where maybe it's arguably neck and neck between he and Mack. Well, what's going to happen when Barr has a better understanding of his responsibilities and the technique associated with the position and really knows what he's doing? So I think Barr has a little higher upside, which is why I gave him the slight edge, but it's kind of a 1A, 1B type situation, just like we have at offensive tackle with Jake Matthews from Texas A&M and Greg Robinson from Auburn. You really can't go wrong with either guy, and I think all 4 of those players I just mentioned are solid top 10 picks, or at least should be.
Definitely, and this wide receiver position, is a group of guys that we haven't seen a group of guys this deep at this position in a long time. So we're going to break down these wide receivers a little bit and kind of dig into what they really have to bring to the table. So we're going to start it off with the guy that everyone expects to be one of the best at the position towards the future, as well as he's the number 1 wide receiver on pretty much everyone's board. That's Sammy Watkins, Clemson. He showed he has the size. He's a lot tougher than many believe. He's quicker than fast. He's actually showed up a lot heavier than I thought he would be. I thought he would be around the 195 range. Came in at 205, 6'1 3/4. A guy that I really like. and I was a little down on after his fantastic freshman season. But he showed up in big ways, starting off with the Georgia game. The one memory I have of him is just lowering his shoulder after taking one bounce off of a tackle and just taking it to the end zone. A guy like that at 6'1", 205, very quick, you want on your football team because he can do everything. And the only flaw I really see in his game is he hasn't really developed a true route tree yet, and that can be developed in the NFL.
Well, and this wide receiver position this year is kind of difficult to talk about because there's so many different players and storylines that we could feature, and it's in large part because of the unprecedented number of underclassmen that came out. 19 wide receivers alone, and basically every top draft-eligible underclassman at wideout came out, or so it seems. But no question, Sammy Watkins from Clemson is the top guy, and it wasn't a sure thing 6 months ago. He had an incredible freshman year, sophomore slump, big time. He had off-the-field issues, durability issues, and it kind of got overtaken as the featured guy in that offense by DeAndre Hopkins, who went on to become a first-round pick and have a nice rookie year for the Houston Texans. But Watkins bounced back in a big, bad way this past season, reestablishing himself as a top pro prospect, and he's going to go really early, potentially as high as number 2 overall. I don't see him falling out any further than maybe the top 5 to 7. So he's going to come off the board very early, and it has the potential to be a true go-to wide receiver at the next level. And I think he's better than the top wideouts in the past couple of drafts to come off the board. I think he's significantly better than Tavon Austin. I think he's a better prospect than Justin Blackmon just because he's more explosive, he's more physically talented. I don't think he's quite A.J. Green, and certainly not Calvin Johnson. So I think just a notch below the Calvin Johnson, A.J. Green type, but that's still not bad, and you can see why he's going to come off the board very, very early. And just the fact that this is such an incredible, deep class of wide receivers, the fact that Watkins, just about everybody across the board agrees he's the top guy, I think that kind of says something.
Definitely, and there's another guy from Clemson that I really thought was going to have a big year, and Martavius Bryant out of Clemson, that 6'5", compared to Randy Moss actually in a lot of ways because he had a lot of deep speed. Really not that great of a season, body catcher, really had some injuries off the field as well. Guy that I really wasn't impressed with. Made a big play and then just would turn around and make 4 or 5 bad ones. Where do you see Martavius Bryant filling in this draft?
Well, and you mentioned a pretty freakish physical specimen. I mean, he measured in at 6'3 3/4", 211 pounds, and he ran a 4.42, which is outstanding speed for a guy that size. And in college, I don't want to say he was unproductive, but doesn't have the type of numbers you'd expect from someone who's as talented he was. Now, this past season was his best by far. He finished with 42 catches for over 800 yards. The thing that strikes me, though, is big play threat. I mean, he averaged over 22 yards per catch over the course of his college career, 13 touchdowns, so 13 touchdowns on just 61 receptions. So he didn't have a lot of them, but he made the ones he did have count. And all the potential in the world, just very rough around the edges. He really needs to work on his route running skills, and kind of reminds me of a poor man's Stephen Hill, who so far has struggled to adjust from the college game to the pros. Now, we'll see. I think this is going to be a big year from Stephen Hill, and maybe he'll burst out kind of like Demaryius Thomas did. But Martavius Bryant, no one denies that he's a early round talent based on the physical tools. I don't think the tape agrees with that, but he's one of those players, I think he's somewhere on that day 2, day 3 fringe, and there's a lot of competition for those spots. And but I mean, just based on the physical tools and potential, yeah, you can probably make an argument for him as well as any player in this class long term, because you just don't see guys that big, that fast at the position too often. So a very intriguing prospect, but I think any team that selects him will be doing so based more on what he can be than what he is right now.
And I know looking forward, we're still in 2014, but as a guy that really latches on to the game of college football, there's another guy in Missouri that reminds me a lot of him, in Dorial Green Beckham, who will be in this same position next year. So for all those college football fans out there, look out for him. But we're in 2014. We'll get to 2015 a little later. But
Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss the year after that, too. There's always good wideouts in the pipeline.
Definitely. And a guy that I have mixed feelings about, because on one hand, I think he has a lot of flaws in his game, and if you pick him up, if you take him early, he's going to disappoint you. But his play on the field and the potential that he can give you is just through the roof. And that's Kelvin Benjamin, Florida State national champion. You can't really take anything away from him at this point. He's actually the brother of former Miami Hurricane wide receiver Travis Benjamin of the Browns. I don't know. I'm still trying to wonder, one, how he ended up at Florida State, and two, how the size difference, because Travis is a 5'11", 180-pound kind of guy, and Kelvin Benjamin is 6'4", 240 pounds. I don't see it. I'm still trying to figure out whether do they have different parents, something. But Kelvin Benjamin is a guy that really makes quarterbacks really think, wow, what could I have with him? And offensive coordinators just get very creative.
Yeah, and of all the underclassmen decisions I mentioned, 19 underclassmen wideouts came out. This is the one that left me scratching my head just a little bit, simply because he was the last of the top-tier guys to declare, so he was able to kind of sit back and survey the landscape a little bit. And I think if he'd gone back for one more year, he was still going to have a very productive season. He was going to be catching balls from Jameis Winston. I don't think there was a threat of his production dropping off. And then I think a year from now, much less competition, I think we might have been talking about Kelvin Benjamin like we're talking about Sammy Watkins this year as a top 5, top 10 overall pick, as opposed to this year he's battling a half a dozen other guys to maybe be a late first rounder. And I think he's in the same position coming out of the scouting combine as he was going in. Now, we thought maybe he could work out really well and even jump up as high as to number 2 at that position behind Sammy Watkins. But even though Benjamin wasn't bad at the combine, you mentioned he came in at 6'5", 240, 34 7/8 arms, 10 1/4 inch hands. Just ridiculous measurables. Just a large man, basically a wide receiver in a tight end's body. Ran a 4.61, which is not great, but it's fine. It's adequate for a guy, especially that size. But Mike Evans worked out better. It's not like Benjamin did enough to help him overtake Evans. I think Mike Evans from Texas A&M kind of seized that number 2 spot. So Benjamin, would I be shocked if he's a late first-round pick? Definitely not. Would I be shocked if he fell into later in the top 50? No. It's just one of those positions where there's a lot of competition. It depends what type of player you're looking for. If Evans is off the board, you want a big physical wideout who can be a threat in the red zone, you're probably going to go with Benjamin. But the team might want a smaller, speedier guy, whether it be Brandon Cooks from Oregon State, Odell Beckham from LSU, etc. So that's kind of the questions that we have right now with Kelvin Benjamin, but no denying the talent. I just think, I think he missed an opportunity to maybe go higher in the draft. Now, he's going to make a lot of money. He's going to go in, if not the first round, early in the second. He's going to have a multi-million-dollar contract, and I'm certainly not faulting him for that. I just think there was potential for him to make a lot more money and go significantly higher.
Now, with him, I do think his age did have a little bit to do with it. Guys aren't getting any younger, and him being 23 years old at the time, I think that really kind of went into it. But I agree with you. I think he had an opportunity to go back and be the number 1 receiver versus being the number 2 receiver, or maybe 3 or 4, because this group is so deep. Because you have guys, like you mentioned, in Mike Evans from Texas A&M. You have Marquise Lee, who actually showed that he's a little bit more healthy now, because after his year where he slumped, and I think a lot of his slump wasn't necessarily his production on the field. When you don't have your quarterback, and Matt Barkley, who actually was a senior, so he ended up going into the NFL. You have a young guy at quarterback, that makes a big difference.
Well, and he probably got Kiffin, too. I mean, what USC prospect either who's maintained their stock or improved their stock under Lane Kiffin? I think across the board, practically, they all went down. So I think Marquise Lee may have been a victim of that to a certain degree as well. And I like Marquise Lee. You mentioned the workout numbers. He came in size-wise. That was going to be one of the concerns. He came in at 5'11 3/4, 192. Only ran 4.52, but I had him estimated 4.50. I think he's one of those guys who's quicker than fast. I think he plays faster than at time speed on the field. So much ado about nothing in terms of Marquise Lee. I still have a feeling, though, that he might slide just a little bit further on draft day than most expect, kind of like what we saw with Robert Woods last year. It wouldn't shock me to see Marquise Lee still available late round 1, maybe even early in round 2, especially because this crop of wideouts is so deep. I wonder if a team, let's say you're the San Francisco 49ers, the Kansas City Chiefs, or Carolina Panthers, one of these number of teams in late round 1 that are potentially thinking about drafting a pass catcher, they might be looking at this and say, well, we could pull the trigger here, or we could wait 2 rounds and maybe get Paul Richardson from Colorado in the 3rd round, or Dante Moncrief from Ole Miss, or someone along those lines. So I think when it comes to maximizing your value, I think we might see some of these teams wait on wideouts a little bit, and I certainly wouldn't fault them. I think that's what I would do if I were running a team.
And you mentioned Ole Miss and Dante Moncrief, as well as Laquan Treadwell a couple of years from now. Ole Miss has actually been putting out some pretty decent receivers the last few years, and Moncrief, I've been kind of watching him the last couple of years, and I said, wow, this guy, he doesn't get a lot of pub because Ole Miss isn't all that great, and they're going to be an 8-4 type of team, or even a 6-6 or a 5-7 type of team. They don't get a lot of cool production from their quarterbacks, but every time I see him, he's making plays. He has strong hands. He's a bit of a body catcher at times, but when he has to make a play, he does. But he kind of got pushed to the side for the freshman this year.
Yeah, and Dante Moncrief worked out extremely well, and I had heard rumblings beforehand that he was going to surprise people, and he absolutely did that. He came in at 6'2 3/8", 221 pounds, and he ran a 4.4 flat. So really impressive blend of size and speed, and I think that's one of those cases where, let's say, for example, he was head-to-head with maybe Allen Robinson from Penn State, another underclassman who came out. Well, Moncrief ran 4.4 flat. Allen Robinson ran 4.6 flat. Maybe that's the type of thing that allows Moncrief to get that ever so slight edge. So once again, I think that's what the combine helps you do, is separate within those tiers. But Moncrief, he's an underrated prospect right now. I really believe that. He's certainly a really good athlete, especially for that size. He's shown the ability to go up and high point the ball and take it away from defenders. Now, he needs to become a better route runner, and he needs to catch he's not the most natural, doesn't have the most natural hands, but this is one of those cases where if I don't either get Sammy Watkins or Mike Evans, I'm probably holding off to take advantage of that depth at the wideout position, and I think this is a good example. A guy like Moncrief, a lot of years, I think we would be talking about him late in the 1st round, whereas this year you're going to be able to get him in the 2nd or 3rd.
Definitely. Now, we're going to go over to LSU, and I have a theory about that whole team in general. If you decide to go, if you want to know who is going to be a top first round, 2nd round, maybe even 3rd round pick, go to their spring game. Check out their spring game. Look at the best freshman you see. See him in 3 years. He'll be a 1st round pick. I just really, I've seen it so many times, from Tyrann Mathieu to Michael Ford, a guy who went later in the draft, but he was a highly publicized guy. From him to you see guys like Jarvis Landry, you see guys like Odell Beckham. I remember Odell Beckham as a freshman, and I said, wow, he has pretty good deep speed, but he doesn't really have a great route. He's not a great route runner. Well, he became a better route runner. Then his deep speed got better. He really is a player that you really tend to like, and I actually ended up liking him a lot better than I like Jarvis Landry.
Well, last season I was just glad to see LSU finally get a competent play caller and a competent quarterback with Cam Cameron and Zach Mettenberger, so they could finally take advantage of all these tremendous skill position players, because nobody has done less with more on offense the last probably 5 years than LSU. They've had all these big-time recruits, but just the inconsistent play from the offense as a whole, and especially the quarterback position, has really, I think, prevented a lot of their playmakers from maximizing their potential. But that wasn't the case this past year, and I'm with you, too. I preferred Beckham over Landry even before the scouting combine. Now, I will caution Landry. He disappointed at the scouting combine. Technically, they listed his time at 4.77, but he got hurt during that. Keep that in mind. So I have a feeling he's going to perform much better at the pro day. But even so, very different types of players. I think Beckham is much more explosive and faster, whereas Landry is more of the well-rounded, good route runner, reliable, possession type. So both very good players. I think it comes down to what type of player you're looking for, and more often than not, guys like Beckham tend to go higher in the draft. And Beckham, based on the way he worked out, and he was one of the stars of the show at the wideout position at the combine, 5'11 and a quarter, 198 pounds, ran a 4.43. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a late first-round pick when all is said and done.
And Scott, now I do have before we kind of get up out of here and end the show, I want to know your top 5 risers and fallers, or if you want to call it your stock up, stock down on this wide receiver position group. Who are they?
Well, in terms of the wide receivers, in terms of guys stock up, I would say Mike Evans from Texas A&M, his stock stayed probably the same as it was, but it had the potential to go down if he had not worked out well. So I think Mike Evans, just by staying in the number 2 spot behind Sammy Watkins, was a winner. But I think Odell Beckham from LSU, certainly, and then Brandon Cooks from Oregon State. I think he was one of the stars of the Combine as a whole. Really, really impressed people, and not a surprise. I mean, the tape's really impressive on Brandon Cooks. 5'9", 3/4, 189. He ran a 4.33. Kind of reminds me of a faster Kendall Wright type of player, and I think Brandon Cooks at this point, it's hard to make a case for him not being in the first round. So those are, I think, the 2 big winners at the wideout position. In terms of the losers, I don't know if anybody really hurt their stocks. Of course, Jarvis Landry, that time is disappointing. We'll have to see if he does better. I think of a guy like Allen Robinson from Penn State, who I mentioned earlier. It's not that he worked out horribly. He ran 4.6 flat, but that's not awful for a guy who's 6'2" and 5'8", 220 pounds. He just didn't work out quite as well as the guys he was competing with, whether it be Jordan Matthews, Richardson, Dante Moncrief, Odell Beckham, etc. So Allen Robinson might drop just a little bit just because I think other guys kind of emerged and maybe leapfrogged him. So I'll throw Allen Robinson out there, even though technically he didn't do awful. It's just his competition did a little better.
Definitely. Scott, it was great having you on the show. Definitely have to have you back on towards the beginning of the NFL draft. Not too happy about it being in May instead of April, but it is what it is. Before we let you go, let the fans know where they can reach you and plug some of your work.
Yeah, check out draftcountdown.com. Everything on the site is 100% free. I'm working on a massive rankings update now, and then I'll be working on a new mock draft shortly after that, so lots of good new content coming in the next couple of weeks. You can also check me out on Twitter at draftcountdown, and we have a podcast as well. You can get it at blogtalkradio.com/draftcountdown or on iTunes. So find me all those places.
All right, Scott, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Fred, anytime.
All right, folks, that was Scott Wright. We'll be back within the week with our War Room position breakdowns towards the end of the scouting process. Pro days are coming up. We'll be reporting on that. Scott, he'll be doing his thing at draftcountdown.com. I'll be doing my thing at heavyinthegames.com in conjunction with warroomsports.com. Make sure you hit me up on Twitter at Perdue Sports, as well as you can hit me up on at heavyinthegames.com. I look forward to talking to you guys next week. I am out.
Kuwait is the war room with 5 nights at the round table, 5 Philly guys.